talk about mitigation more than reducing greenhouse gases. Anyway, they're both important. Thank you so much for your presentation and so forth. I will now turn to these ladies from the Ottawa region. As everyone knows, the Ottawa region is of great concern to me. And climate, weather, let me see, yes, Environment Canada, via its Canadian Meteorological Services, already provides citizens with very interesting information, businesses as well, in provinces and territories, weather information that's accurate. There are warnings, official warnings sent out, but you think that a national strategy, such as that proposed in this bill, would also be of real use. Why wouldn't we just go over the current duties of the Canadian Meteorological Services? Wouldn't that be enough?
What we have is that not only does the federal government could create this strategy, but there is a need to ensure that we are still gaining the kind of long-term data that we need to inform these predictions. So one piece is around continuing to capture the historical data. This is one role that the federal government can play. So the hydrometric stations, many of which were active in this watershed up to 1990, but 44% of those have since been removed from service. And so we're finding that there is actually a decrease in how much we're measuring. So I can't speak to how that compares with the meteorological services, but we know for a fact that there is a decrease in this watershed of measuring on those flow levels. So that is one area where we would recommend to see that there be an improvement, and that could inform the strategy.
OK, on était rendu à bout de temps, là.
Very well, we've come to the end of our time. We have 10 seconds. Perhaps I could very quickly add that another way that the Government of Canada could play a role would be by ensuring that all the regions in Canada have equal access to the information available, not only the provinces that have more stations. We must move on to Ms. Collins, but Mr. Longfield, you raised your hand.
Go after Ms. Collins.
OK, Ms. Collins, you have 6 minutes.
And thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony. My first question is to Ms. Orlando and the Citizens Climate Lobby. Recently, the Citizens Climate Lobby published an article on the uninsurable world and really highlighting how the increasing severity of flooding, of droughts, of these kind of extreme weather events have some pretty detrimental impacts when it comes to insurance, including insurance company bankruptcies, elevated consumer prices, increasing publicly funded compensation, meaning the damages are being paid directly by taxpayers, and the withdrawal of insurance coverage. And so I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about this and how we are at risk as regions become uninsurable.
Great question. So what Citizens Climate Lobby does is our volunteers gather information, expert information, and condense it into documents that we call laser talks. And it was shocking to read the data that our volunteers have put together. Here in Canada, there's over 1.5 million high-risk households that cannot obtain affordable flood insurance in Canada. There's also risks of like people losing their insurance because from year to year their insurance prices can go up. We are heading towards an uninsurable world, and we need to mitigate the climate crisis as fast as possible. So one of our recommendations is that you have all this modeling data, and we're just wondering, wouldn't it be helpful to have like a business as usual trajectory versus, mitigating as fast as possible? Like we need data to guide what is happening, because we are heading towards an uninsurable world, and the data is pretty dramatic in here. And there was a second laser talk for Ontario, and it was a climate risk report that was released quietly in the summer of 2023, and again it talks about, unless we mitigate this crisis, the agricultural impacts will be quite high. So, not to get into numbers, I encourage you to read these reports, and I want to thank you for starting this flood and drought national program, because I once served as the co-chair of the Sudbury Adaptation Panel, and we need data to drive our decision making. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to this, and also to sound the warning. And thank you, Robert, for sounding the warning as well. Really appreciated listening to you, Mr. Sanford.
So my next question are for the Ottawa Riverkeepers, and really, you've talked a lot about the importance of data sharing. I'm curious, as you looked at the couple of suggestions that for this national strategy, how you see, in particular, well, you're focused on the Ottawa, but in particular, more rural, remote regions, how this kind of data will support them and their watershed management.
So while we work on the Ottawa River, we work throughout the entire watershed, and so many of the tributaries would flow through some of these remote areas. And I think again, it's that idea of having equal access to accurate flood or drought warning systems that is really critical. And also there is, of course, the impact of what's happening upstream or downstream. And so if there are changes that are happening that might affect rural populations, it's important that that's captured. And so we can't just concentrate on one area because more people live there. We really have to understand it at the watershed scale.
Thanks so much. And then also for Mr. Stanford, thanks again for your testimony and really highlighting the existential threat that we are facing. Hearing some of the testimony from the Citizens Climate Lobby about kind of the uninsurability of certain areas, and there was a article published today interviewing a woman in Kelowna. She bought her home and is now finding it impossible to insure because she's nearby wildfires. Many insurance companies have pulled out of California because of the severe drought conditions. I'm curious if in your work you're coming up against some of these insurance impacts of the climate crisis.
Yes, of course, because insurance issues are widespread. And the other thing, from a global perspective, there are many parts of the world that are being dramatically affected by extreme weather events for which insurance has never been available. Poor countries that have to rely on their own governments to be able to help people after emergency crisis that pummel them one time after another, places like Mozambique, places like parts of Pakistan. One of the things that I find interesting about this question, however, though, is it really is about growing uncertainty and how much uncertainty, how much does it cost? And I just came back from a series of conferences in the Okanagan where they're very, very afraid not just of the insurance issue, but whether or not their economy might not have to change as a result of how rapidly their climate is being altered. So what I find really interesting about this is that we're approaching urgency here.
Thank you.
The emergency that we're talking about is urgency.
Sorry,
Point of order.
Just a moment. Yes, Mr. Mazer.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to raise a point of privilege. On Thursday, March 21st, 2024, the Environment Committee passed a motion ordering Minister Guilbeault's department to produce information on how much the carbon tax will reduce emissions. The committee specifically ordered the production of the government's provincial territorial computable equilibrium model called EC Pro. This was a model that the government referenced to when asked how they projected their carbon tax would reduce emissions by 30%. The committee also ordered the production of all economic modeling associated with this model. Ordering the production of documents is a privilege of parliamentarians to effectively represent Canadians. I will draw to your attention to page 983 of Bosc and Gagnon's House of Commons Procedure and Practice, which states, and I quote, "The standing orders state that standing committees have the power to order the production of papers and records, another privilege that is rooted in the Constitution and which is delegated by the House. In carrying out their responsibility to conduct studies and inquiries, standing committees often have to rely on a wide array of papers to aid them in their work."
Mr. Mazur, can I interrupt for 1 second? I just want to tell the witnesses that we finished one round of questioning, and unfortunately we won't have, even before your intervention, we would not have had time for a second round. So, and I'm sorry about that. But I just wanted to thank all the witnesses for their answers, for being here, first of all, and for their answers to the questions. So thank you, and we please. It's an open public meeting. You can remain if you wish, but I'm sure you have, may have other things. So suit yourselves. But thank you for being here today, Mr. Mazur. Continue, please.
I will also draw to your attention to House of Commons Practice and Procedure, which states Parliament is not limited in their ability to order the production of documents. Page 984 of Bosc and Gagnon state, and I quote, "The standing orders do not delimit the power to order the production of papers and records. The result is a broad, absolute power that on the surface appears to be without restriction. There is no limit on the types of papers likely to be requested," end quote. Chair, the committee ordered the government to produce their carbon tax emission model within 1 week of the motion being adopted. Not only did the Environment and Climate Change Canada fail to respond within the timeline ordered by the committee, they failed to provide the complete information the committee ordered. Instead of providing the committee with a carbon tax emission model, the government provided an 18-page draft paper that attempts to describe the model. In fact, each page of the document is covered with a watermark that states it's simply a draft paper. The document provided to the committee is titled, and I quote, "Environment Canada's Provincial CGE Model," with a footnote at the end of the title. The footnote to the so-called model reveals that this paper is in fact not the carbon tax emission model. The footnote states, and I quote, "Please note that this is a draft in progress. Any comments will be appreciated." Views expressed in this paper are those of the authors and do not reflect those of Environment and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada, end quote. I'll also draw to the committee's attention to the draft document's conclusion on page 12, which states, and I quote, "This document provides a work-in-progress draft description of ECCC's provincial CGE D-level CGE model used for carbon policy analysis," end quote. Once again, proof that the government has failed to provide their carbon tax emission analysis. In fact, nowhere in the documents does the government specifically state how they projected their carbon tax would reduce emissions by 30% in detail. Nor does it mention how many emissions have been reduced from the carbon tax or the impact the carbon tax is having on the economy. This is very concerning.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Given Canada's...
Since we don't have points of privilege very often, is this like a dilatory motion? Is there a vote after it? Are we debating it?
Apparently, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Clerk, I would have to rule on whether it's a point of privilege. And I'm sure whatever I decide, there will be disagreement with what I decide. And therefore, there could be some kind of vote, as I understand it. Is that correct? Well, yeah, my decision could be challenged. So that's how I understand it. So.
And are we to assume that we're going to deal with this for the remainder of until 6 p.m. or what time will we go?
Well, we do. That's a good question. We do have the room till 6 because we were expecting to do future business. But in any event, I can't interrupt Mr. Mazur at this point, can I? No. The only thing that could stop Mr. Mazur would be if the resources were no longer available. Is that correct? Pardon? We have resources. Nobody's turned off the mics or the interpretation. So go ahead, Mr. Mazur.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, proof that the government has failed to provide their carbon tax emission analysis. In fact, Nowhere in the documents does the government specifically state how they projected their carbon tax would reduce emissions by 30% in details. Nor does it mention how many emissions have been reduced from the carbon tax or the impact the carbon tax is having on the economy. This is very concerning, given Canada's Commissioner of the Environment has stated that the government is not on track to meet its own 2030 emission reduction targets. Chair, when the government fails to provide documents, the committee ordered, they undermined the committee and limit our ability to serve Canadians. Failing to provide documents ordered by a committee is a breach of privilege. I therefore ask to move my motion of privilege so we can obtain the government's carbon tax emission information. Thank you.
I have to rule? Okay. This is the first time I think we've encountered something like this. The way I see it, I believe that the documents have been provided. I'll ask Mr. Vancouver. Yeah, they've been provided. Yeah, I mean, but regardless, I think, I mean, let's say, theoretically, Mr. Mazer, if you had said we want the documents within a half an hour, and
Didn't.
No, but I'm just saying hypothetically, and obviously it wouldn't be possible within a half an hour. So would that be a breach of privilege? I don't. My gut tells me no. You did ask for them before. You asked for them in a week. You gave a week. Mr. Vancouverden mentioned at the last meeting that this would be very difficult, and we did get them maybe not a week later, but almost a week later. So to me, it's not the end of the world, that we got them a bit late. That's number one. Number two, my understanding is there is no, there are estimates, there's modeling estimates of how much the price on carbon will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. My understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, is that there is no data specifically stating that the price on carbon resulted in an X amount of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and I don't even think that's possible, quite frankly. I think you can do modeling and you can estimate, and there's good economic theory behind the price on carbon. So in a sense, we're asking for something that's not possible to produce. Yeah.
Just curious, are you giving your ruling right now, or is there an opportunity for?
No, I'm giving it. Pardon? I'm ruling whether it relates to privilege, and I'm just trying to share with you my thinking on this. Either way, I'm going to be challenged, I know. So, but that's my thinking. So I don't personally think it's a breach of privilege, since the information as it exists has been provided. But obviously, you're free to challenge that.
So it's not reasonable, of course.
Not in my opinion, but that's
We challenge that.
Okay, so how do we proceed now? It's a vote.
Yeah, it's a vote.
Okay.
Is there any debate about the?
I don't think so. I think it's dilatory. So, right?
That's right, yeah.
You do realize, Chair, they did not provide the model that we asked for. Whether there's proof or not, we just simply asked for a model. That's all we asked for. And they didn't provide it. That was a simple fact. But you make your decision.
Yeah, I mean, we could have a whole meeting on what exists, what doesn't exist, and what was provided. I can't. There's no. Il n'y a pas d'intervention. Point of order. À moins que ce soit un appel au règlement.
Unless it's yes, I can point of order. Yeah, sure.
More just in terms of process, are we, when someone raises a point of privilege, are members not allowed to also weigh in, much like
Apparently not. I've only encountered this for the first time I've encountered it, but I'm told no. I just have to rule, and that's what I'm told. So, Madame Posey?
Non, ben, c'est un petit peu dans le même sens.
Well, it's somewhat in the same line of thinking. Perhaps, no, there's nothing we can say to this motion, right? No, I don't believe we can speak to this. We could check this if you'd like. So, all right, 5-minute break, and we'll check this to be absolutely sure.
a model is a set of equations, right? It's a set of equations and outputs, and it looks to me like the model, was provided. Now, if you feel you need more information, that somehow the questions, the data here raises more questions, you can table another motion at another date. But as far as I'm concerned, the model has been provided. Now, you could say, well, we'd like to see the codes, the computer codes that drive the computing of the equation. I mean, it's a never-ending kind of argument. But so, as far as I'm concerned, the model has been provided. If you feel it's insufficient, I would suggest that you table another motion saying we want precision on this, that, and the other thing. But anyway, there is no debate. Yes, a point of order?
Yeah, earlier today in the House of Commons,
but is it a point of order?
It's referring to what we're discussing here. And
I think
sure.
You
guys don't like it when you hear other people.
very quickly, because okay.
You don't
anyway,
like being told that you're wrong. So
no. So let's just go to the vote, because we have some future business to discuss in camera, or we can't really have a meeting on Thursday. So, Mr. Ali, is your hand up, or is it no?
Yes, Chair.
There's no debate, though. Is it a point of order?
It's just a point of clarity about the vote. Are we voting?
I've made a decision. I've made a ruling that this is not a point of privilege. And pardon?
Okay.
It relates to privilege. Sorry, it's not. That's a technical difference. But I've made a ruling that it does not relate to privilege. And obviously, there are those who disagree. So. Mr. Mazier has challenged my ruling, and so we're voting on whether people agree. Yeah, to sustain the chair, whether members agree with him or with me, basically.
Okay.
So, yeah. So we'll just go to the vote and be done with this particular item. Il m'a mis au défi. Okay.
He challenged me, and that's what we're voting on, as to whether my decision is sustained or whether you agree with Mr. Mazier. Rather, that's your choice. We're voting on whether you back Mr. Mazier's point of view.
Be sustained. Mr. Ali?
I agree with Chair.
Madame Chatel? Mr. Longfield?
Yes.
Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Vancouverden?
yes.
Mr. Dadtel? Mr. Cram?
No.
Mr. Leslie?
No.
Mr. Mazer?
No.
Madame Posey?
No.
Ms. Collins?
I'm sorry, just for point of clarification, if I vote no, it's to sustain whose side?
If you vote no, you're siding with Mr. Mazier, I believe. Is that
Got
correct?
it.
But there's not going to be, as I understand it, just a point. I don't think there's a debate after this. Is there?
So if it's a no, then Mr. Mazer moves his motion.
Oh, moves his motion. Yeah. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll be debating his motion. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So if my decision is overturned, then Mr. Mazier will table a motion, and we'll debate the motion.
Oh, no.
Oui, la motion. On débat la motion. Go ahead. So are you with Mr. Mazier? Or are you with the chair?
As in, I vote no.
You're with Mr. Mazier. Okay. Okay. So Mr. Mazier, you can table your motion.
Thank you. Whereas the committee passed a motion on Thursday, March 21st, 2024, which stated, in part, the committee order the production of the Environment and Climate Change Canada's Provincial Territorial Computable General Equilibrium Model, EC-PRO, including I, the statistical technique to isolate the carbon pricing contribution, II, a list of all REF parameters, including the REF 22 and the REF 22A parameters used in the EC-PRO, III, the EC-PRO model that projected the carbon pollution pricing will contribute as much as 1/3 of Canada's emissions reductions, including all parameters, economic modeling, and assumptions, and that these documents be provided to the committee within 1 week of adoption of the motion. And whereas Environment and Climate Change Canada has failed to provide all information ordered by the committee within the adopted timeline. Accordingly, the committee views this failure
order,
to
Mr.
comply
Chair.
with this committee.
Are we debating a new motion?
Yes,
This is a brand new motion?
It's sur un point de privilège.
Yes, on a matter of privilege.
And whereas, so I'll just go back to where I was interrupted. And whereas Environment and Climate Change Canada has failed to provide all information ordered by the committee within the adopted timeline, accordingly, the committee views this failure to comply with the committee order and as a violation of its privileges, and that this matter be reported to the House.
We'll have Mr. Vancouver in here, and then Mr. Longfield, Ms. Collins, Madame Posey.
So before I say anything, for clarification, we had a vote. Oh, gee.
Yeah, sorry. So, like, I think when we went around the horn when you were deciding your basically motion of privilege, the documents, and you held them up, Chair. They were basically, they had draft, they had watermarked all over them. They weren't even from, like, I just read the motion. They weren't even from ECCC. They admitted that right in the document. So to think that they somehow answered the whole question of the question of the committee, and we can just ask again, is actually quite false. Like, I mean, they didn't even come close to where we were trying to get with this. And the reason why the details and the reference to the 22 and 22A and all that is because it was out of an order paper question that they actually denied that this is what the results are. It was going to come to their emissions and reductions, and everything was going to work out fine. Just believe us in the model. So we simply asked the government to prove that point. And unfortunately, this government, the ECCC, chose to absolutely just not refer to the committee at all. So.
You are.
Okay, great.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
So this is kind of the conundrum we're in, especially as an MP, and trying to figure out what this government's up to. They keep on telling us that they're reducing emissions. That just pay your tax and everything will be just fine. And it is very frustrating. Not only frustrating to me as representing a rural area and paying a disproportionate part of carbon tax, but also to every Canadian. The number one issue that I was listening to for the last 2 weeks was affordability and what are we doing with this carbon tax. They couldn't believe that this was actually going up. The carbon tax was going up 23% on April 1st. Everybody knew that. And yet this government kept on plowing forward. And then, to add insult to injury, they're paying actually, so a natural gas bill, I actually used this example earlier today. The natural gas bill of $100 is paying a carbon tax amount of about $110, $115. The point being that they did not answer the question at all in this regime. And I honestly do believe that we need to get to the bottom of this and get these the questions answered, and let's us see what we can actually do with this model. Because it's not really the prerogative of the department to actually say, no, we've got to turn this around and we're not going to answer you, committee. That is not the prerogative of the department. They have to be held to accountable. And someone is actually saying, this is okay. I would like to know who from ECCC or who from the minister's department said, yeah, let's give them this. And actually write in there, oh, this isn't from ECCC. Let's see if they actually read it. Like, this is what it is. Please note that this is a draft in progress. Any comments will be appreciated. Well, I'll tell you what, they're going to find out what kind of comments you're going to have.
Go to Mr. Vancouver.
Views expressed in this paper are those of the authors and do not reflect those of Environment and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada. And here we are. The committee order the production of Environment and Climate Change Canada's Provincial Territory Computable General Equilibrium Model, ECCC. We went through all these IEIs and all these parameters, and whereas the Environment and Climate Change Canada has failed to provide all information ordered by the committee within an adopted timeline. This is what, the second, third time we've asked for this? And then they just blow us off with this. It's totally unacceptable. And I think more that people find out, what are they hiding? What is the government hiding? That's what keeps on, people keep on asking. I keep on asking that. I know all my colleagues are asking that question. It's outrageous. And I do honestly believe we need to debate this. We need to get to the bottom of this. And all they have to do is just produce the model and answer the questions. That's simply all they have to do. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why they will not do that. So I do actually, I kind of wonder why. I really do wonder why. And you wonder why we're calling on the Prime Minister to bring in all the premiers, try to gather around.
I'm just curious because you did mention that we might run out of resources. Are we able to add ourselves to the speaking list on resources available today?
You can. I've got 4 people before you. Mr.
Are we planning on extending?
I think we would have to be done at 6:15. I think that's unless we ask. But can we ask if it's how much time could they add? Maybe we could ask them how much time they could add, and
we could just
find out if you got time.
Yeah, why don't we just say what's the latest we can go with the resources? You want to be on the list, though, Mr.
Sure, yes,
yeah.
Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go, continue, Mr. Oui. Monsieur Deltel. Okay. Mr. Mazier, are you still speaking on this? Or?
Yeah, I was talking about it earlier today, is how fundamentally, rural Canada has changed because of the carbon tax. And people are back in 2016, I was basically a farm leader at the time. I was president of Keystone Agriculture Producers, and I was around when Minister McKenna actually introduced the carbon tax. And we were promised that it was going to be revenue neutral. We're going to go beyond $50 a ton. But as time, and I'll have to admit, the farmers were leery, but we were trying to give them a chance, right, and seeing what this new idea was all about. And I was quite as you go forward 8 years, and by increasing the actual the amount of what's being the cost to farmers in general. They've tripled it. We're up to what, $65 a ton right now, and it is really starting to drag on the rural economy. So it is really starting to drag on the rural economy, and it's fundamentally changed the economic model for agriculture. And I don't think people actually understand what they're doing. We were talking about trying to provide infrastructure for water today. This is all about landscape management. This is all about protecting our resources in Canada. And we can't do it with this anchor of a carbon tax around our neck in rural Canada. So with that, I close. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a reminder to anybody who's watching that the Conservative Party in 2021 ran on a promise to price pollution at the same price that we are currently pricing pollution. And the clean organization called Clean Prosperity said that Aaron O'Toole was right to embrace carbon pricing in an exit poll. They said, as part of his climate policy, Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole proposed a carbon pricing system that would raise the cost of gasoline and home heating. However, all the money that you pay in carbon pricing would be deposited for you in a low carbon savings account. It was affectionately termed the more you burn, the more you earn, like some kind of a loyalty program for using fossil fuels. Now, in a hypothetical alternate universe, if the Conservatives won the last federal election, then in 2024, where we find ourselves, there would be a price on pollution. If Aaron O'Toole was the Prime Minister, then there would continue to be a carbon tax. We ran on a commitment to price carbon and pollution at the rate that we are currently doing so, which represents the integrity of our platform and the follow-through of our commitment to Canadians to reduce our emissions. Now, the current crop of Conservatives apparently have spun on their heels. They don't agree. I will point out that Mr. Leslie didn't run on that campaign because he ran a different campaign, if that's what he would like to say. I can make that point for you. Thank you very much.
I was actually just going to question the relevance, Mr. Chair, to the motion at hand.
Well, it's been a pretty wide-ranging discussion. But anyway, I mean, you know,
he ran a campaign on homophobia,
Mr. Mazur
not
talked
on
about
anti-carbon price.
Excuse me, everybody. Mr. Mazur talked about the agricultural sector. He ventured into a broader discussion of carbon pricing and its impact. So, I mean, if we could sort of keep it on track, but I won't rule that Mr. Van Koerden is out of order or anything. But let's try to keep it on the topic of producing the documents that Mr. Mazur wants to produce.
The fact is, we spend so much time in this Environment Committee talking about carbon pricing, which is a mutual commitment of our last two federal campaigns. This is something that we both ran on a commitment for, and I accept that Brendan Leslie, MP Leslie, ran his own campaign. So you didn't run on the same price because your leader was Pierre Poilievre. But earlier today, Mr. Chair, a member of Parliament, Ted Falk, said in debate that the oceans are responsible for more carbon than humans. And a couple of weeks ago, a Conservative member of Parliament said that body heat was responsible for global warming. You know, we're not dealing with people who are relying on facts and evidence or research. And when we are asked to provide documents, those documents are provided. It's no surprise that the Conservatives don't like the math or don't like the evidence, because they've leaned into climate change denial as their policy plank now. It's not that they don't agree with the fact that our climate is changing. They've now decided that they don't like the answers that they've received.
Excuse me, Mr. Mazur.
I'm not doing this for clips.
Can we keep
I
it
don't care.
relevant?
Well,
I'm talking about a motion producing a model. I don't know what this has to do with us denying anything. Thank you.
Could you maybe
I'll wrap it up.
Wrap it up, Mr.
So,
help me out here.
What I suspect is actually happening here is the Conservatives are running this cover-up campaign because on the same day, April 1st, Premier Daniel Smith increased the price of gas in Alberta by more than the carbon price did. And, you know, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation freaked out about it. And that's, again, the Conservative base. So, you know, they're upset by that. But the thing about the carbon price going up a little bit is so do the Canada carbon rebates. Canadians continue to get more back through the price on pollution, carbon rebate, than they pay at the pumps. That's not true of a 4-cent increase to the price of gas in Alberta. But, I mean, these four members are not from Alberta, so perhaps they don't necessarily care as much about a non-rebatable increase that's more than the increase that you've just blown out of proportion, talked about ad nauseum, call it 23% increase. But the price on gas was increased by more in Alberta by that, and you haven't mentioned it once. So if it's such an enormous concern, the price of gas affecting our constituents, then why not bring up the fact that it was brought up, it was also increased by Premier Daniel Smith, because you haven't mentioned that once. So, Mr. Chair, it'd be great if we discussed in this committee how we fight climate change, not refuting the facts and evidence from hundreds of Canadian scholars and researchers and economists who do this for a living, not calling into question a Nobel Prize in economics from William Nordhaus, who proved that carbon pricing lowers emissions, and not refuting the very fact that our emissions have dropped in the last 8 years by over 8% now, and much of that is directly attributable to the price on pollution.
Just prove it. Just prove it.
Now to Mr. Longfield.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. In terms of the motion of privilege, I think what I saw yesterday coming to my email yesterday morning about 10:41 was some documents that showed some formulas, things that were being asked to show how the forecasts were being done. The document came from a different organization, which kind of surprised me a bit, but then given the amount of time that the department had to prepare this and get it into translation and try and get it in terms of our committee getting it to us before our meeting, I thought, okay, well, we see where the formulas are. We see the documents that they were, or the process that they are following. So in terms of a motion of privilege, I think the information was received before the meeting as requested. The information may have been incomplete in terms of some of the members. I was satisfied with what I saw. So I didn't feel like my privilege was being violated. I think the information was good enough for what I saw. We might want more information, and of course the committee can ask for that if some of the members don't like the information, but it's not that privilege was violated. because we did get the information that was requested in the short amount of time that they were given to get it to translation and to get it to us. So we do have some information. Maybe we could ask for more information, and that could be done without having to invoke privilege. I think that's getting a little dramatic. So I wouldn't support this as a privilege motion, but I would like to see more information coming forward. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Longfield. Madame Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Longfield. Ms. Collins.
I do think it's important for us to have this discussion. When I received the documents, I definitely was wondering if the officials or if the government had intentionally misunderstood the request that had been made. We want the data showing how the government came to the conclusion about 1/3 of Canada's emissions. And so, honestly, as someone who, especially when it comes to the industrial carbon price, this is a critical policy. I am someone who wants a robust climate policy, and I think this committee deserves to have the data that the government is working off of. And so in the spirit of collaboration, hopefully to bring everyone around this table together, I have a motion that the committee order the production of the model and data from ECCC that demonstrate that carbon pollution pricing will contribute as much as 1/3 of Canada's emissions reductions, and that these documents be provided to the committee within 2 weeks of the adoption of this motion. I'm not sure if I can move this right now, but I'm hopeful that we can have this discussion and then I can move that motion afterwards, and so that we can get the information that we need and that the committee members deserve to have. I think there is a very valid complaint that the Conservatives are raising today. I don't know if it's a question of privilege yet, but I would potentially support a question of privilege if the government yet again refuses to give us the information we need.
Merci de nous aviser.
Thank you for giving us a heads up of your intention, once the discussion is over, of course, of putting forward a motion, a supplementary motion. Ms. Posey, over to you. Yes, Chair. And it wasn't a personal matter when I voted against your decision. But this is a debate that I care deeply about. What Mr. Longfield said earlier is perfectly acceptable to me. And the motion is pretty much what I suggested to Mr. Deltel earlier. If there's data missing, let's just request the data and let's give them a deadline to produce it. And there we are. Any more information will be very important to our debates to help us think through a very intense climate urgency situation here, so that would suit me perfectly. Much like Mr. Longfield, however, I don't think that my parliamentary privilege has been crossed. That's not my take on this, but getting more information with a deadline for producing it, that would be very nice.
Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate my esteemed colleague across the way highlighting not, in fact, run on a carbon tax and never would. One of the things that I think back on, one of those early promises of the Prime Minister was that in 2015 his government would become open by default. And that was something that I think everybody can get behind. And this seems to be a prime example of an opportunity to be open by default, to have information requested as to the economic and environmental modeling of what emissions would be reduced from the consumer carbon tax. And we've seen delays, and fair enough, this is complicated matters to hand in, but to be handed over a document that says this isn't made by ECCC, it doesn't reflect ECCC, and then just told that this is what our model is? Like, why is this believable? You're telling me that ECCC doesn't have any better data than 4 people? They're not even doctors. They're just people. I don't even know who these people are. Put together this paper, and maybe it was hastily put together over the last 2 weeks, but that would be either very worrisome or extremely surprising that there's been no homework done over the last 8 years of this carbon tax being developed and to put in place. It is not only not open by default, it seems to be, as my colleague Ms. Collins alluded to, maybe an attempt to hide this. This is why we're continuously asking for more money. And perhaps the motion that has been brought forward upon hearing my colleague Ms. Collins' motion is almost too specific, and I will happily support her motion because it's perhaps an opportunity to see if the government is truly trying to hide behind this by offering a very clear, open invitation to share both the data and the modeling, and perhaps I will support my colleague's motion as well. But there is clearly something here. I expect better out of ECCC. I expect better out of a government that claims to be open by default, and I think all parliamentarians of all political stripes should too.
Merci, Monsieur Leslie. Monsieur Deltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Le débat qui...
Thank you very much, Chair. The ongoing debate here, for those listening to us, it's not about whether this is a good or a bad tax, the carbon tax, but rather as to whether we can get full access to the way the carbon tax is being evaluated. Because on this side of the House, you have people who have completely different points of view about the carbon tax, but certainly agree and wish to all get hold of relevant and neutral information. This is why my colleague from the Bloc Québécois, whom I respect greatly, even though we don't always have the same ideas about everything, but that's what a democracy is, isn't it? And let's bless our stars for being in a democracy, being able to celebrate that every day as we do in this House. But we're looking for the same thing. My colleague at the NDP seems to be aligned with that as well. And, of course, the NDP colleagues represent very well a good deal of this country, including a large part of the English-Canadian population. So has the government provided us with, as we requested, the relevant documents that we required of them? At least, Chair, our request was clear. The motion called for information from ECC, for the production of documents from Environment and Climate Change Canada. That's the department we were speaking to. And what do we see in this document that has been provided to us? And allow me to quote it.
OK, c'est un document qui est en train d'être rédigé, mais c'est un brouillon qui est en train de se produire. Bon.
It's kind of a draft that they're like working on or something. I mean, that's very worrisome at the outset. But even more interesting is as follows here.
Appreciate. Oh, yes, for sure. Ça, je peux vous dire une chose.
Yeah, sure, of course. As my colleague, Mr. Mazier, said earlier, oh, right, sure, of course, we'll have a lot to tell them if they ask for our comments. And even before all Canadians, and they should certainly have a right to speak as well, before all Canadians get to speak to the relevance or not of a tax carbon, because it's quite sure that the next federal election will be on this topic. Canadians will have a chance to decide for themselves. No, there's nothing here in this document produced by the government, which the government presents as being a thorough answer.
The Environmental and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada. Les points de vue exprimés dans ce document sont ceux des auteurs.
So the points of view in this document are the authors only and do not reflect those of Environment and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada.
Ne se représente pas la volonté.
Do not represent or not an expression of the department's point of view. So that's where it becomes problematic, really, Chair. It's quite simple. With all due respect for my colleague from Repentigny, my colleague here from Repentigny, who is always very polite in all matters and nothing personal. Of course, Chair, when a little earlier we challenged your judgment, it's just very clear. Our request is clear, and it's clear that we haven't gotten what we asked for. Very clear to us here and the opposition and with these other parties here. We're just looking for clear figures, information, and then, politicians will do their job. I'm not someone who questions the right to debate. I mean, debate is at the heart of democracy.
And we are as important because we are. There is here around this table 4 different parties. Hey, this is what democracy is all about. Yes, we will fight our ideas. We will fight for or against. We will address it. We will challenge the opposition of our point of view. Well, this is what democracy is all about, and the House of Commons is all about, and this committee is all about. We all do recognize that climate change is real and we have to address it. There is good ways to address it. There is bad ways to address it. And this is what the people will decide in the next election, which is the way that the people want to address it. So this is why, Mr. Speaker, to have a clear debate, to have an honest debate, to know exactly where we want to go, we need to have all the data. And who can provide this data? There is plenty of people who can do it. So this is why, Mr. Speaker, our motion addresses directly to the government. And by the way, we are not the government. This is not a conservative government. This is the government of Canada. So technically speaking, there is no party in this government. There is no color of this government. This is the government of this country, of the whole people. So this is why we are asking them, give us the data. Donnez-nous toutes les informations nécessaires.
So that's what we're asking them for, data. Give us all the data, all the information to help us debate this in depth. And of course, I fully respect my colleagues, MP of Mercier, any case, the Minister of the Environment, the Honourable Minister of the Environment. Mercier, yes, some area that my colleague here knows well. I'm not always that clear on who represents which ridings up there, but there are NDPers, there are Liberals, there are others. One day, I hope that Conservatives will be up there as well. But as I'm saying, I have full respect for my colleague. He was as a journalist, I interviewed him, and I've always respected him for his frankness and for his arguments, even if I didn't always agree with them. And so often he said, and he's even said here in this committee and in the House and when he's interviewed, right, left and center, that yes, this is effective, efficient, all the data shows that we're able to lower greenhouse gas emissions thanks to this new carbon tax. I don't agree with him, but I certainly gave him a chance to explain himself, and now we're giving him a chance to prove this with government data, government documents that we'll be able to demonstrate clearly, figures, and so on, that the equation is an accurate one. Unfortunately, that's not what's going on, Chair. That's why we are really disappointed to see that no one wants to shed light on the situation here.
The only group that can do that is the group, if I say that very politely, but it's the Government of Canada. This is Environmental and Climate Change Canada Department who can provide it. Et ce que l'on voit malheureusement, Monsieur le Président, actuellement.
Unfortunately, what we see now, Chair, is that the request was very clear, very detailed. We needed these documents and we needed these elements covered in the documents very clearly in black on white. We write it out here. And the department in the document that they have provided us with recognizes that their document is indeed nothing but a draft that's ongoing, that it can be changed, that all the comments are, welcome. They hope for comments, but that the point of view of the document, in the document, is the author's point of view, and it in no way reflects the point of view of ECCC or of the Government of Canada. That's not at all what we asked for, Chair. So, of course, if we delve into the document at page 3, we see a mathematical equation, quite impressive. I'm not going to read it because it's been some time since I looked over those matters, chemistry and physics, I'm 60 now. But there are a number of very, very intriguing, interesting equations here. But is that what we asked for? We asked them to explain how they do this and what the real effect would be. But no, they tell us this is not the Government of Canada's point of view. So I'm very surprised to see that as parliamentarians, given these very clear facts, there are nevertheless colleagues who are saying, oh, no, this is just fine as it is. So you have the NDP's proposal, which specifies that they would like more data based on, deadlines and so on. And I can certainly understand this being put forward by my Bloc Québécois colleague here. But, Chair, the truth will come out and the facts will become obvious. And eventually we'll understand what this is truly all about. After that, Chair, we'll each be able to present our points of view with arguments based on science, based on facts, objective and neutral facts that everyone can see clearly and agree on. We have seen very often, Chair, in debate, people saying, look, I agree to this because, I quoted someone and that seems a good thing to do. That's the right person to quote. And fine, based on such and such a study analysis, all very well. But this can be defended, of course, but for an objective discussion, we need common ground. We need a space from which we work, where the information is shared, where we all have the same information and agree on it. Best way to get to that point is to have the Government of Canada provide that information. We've asked for that information, but we asked very sincerely, and we didn't get it. Worse, the document that was sent to us is quite the opposite. It really reflects the fact that this is not a complete response, that this is not even a response from the Government of Canada. So our aim as parliamentarians, which was supported by the majority here at the committee, to access these documents, given that that's not what we've gotten. It's very clear, Chair, that this is a breach of our parliamentary privilege.
6:30. I'm just curious, are we going to go past 6:30? Or do we have the resources?
We have the resources for another 4 hours.
4 hours, okay.
Yeah. So I think, if I may intervene here, to provide some clarity, I think, could you read your motion again, Mr. Mazier?
Sure. Got it here. Whereas the committee passed the motion on Thursday, March 21st, 2024, which stated, in part, the committee ordered the production of Environment and Climate Change Canada's Provincial Territory Computable General Equilibrium Model, EC-PRO, including 1, the statistical technique to isolate the carbon pricing contribution, 2, a list of all REF parameters, including the REF 22 and the REF 22A parameters used in the EC-PRO. 3, the EC-PRO model that projected that carbon pollution pricing will contribute as much as 1/3 of Canada's emissions reductions, including all 1, the parameters, 2, the economic modeling, and 3, the assumptions, and that these documents be provided to the committee within 1 week of the adoption of this motion. And whereas Environment and Climate Change Canada has failed to provide all information ordered by the committee within the adopted timeline. Accordingly, the committee views this is a failure to comply with this committee order as a violation of privileges, and that this matter be reported to the House.
Okay, so this is what the choice we face. Either the committee supports Mr. Mazier's motion, and I have a feeling that we're not going to get to a vote on it for another 4 hours. So there's that, or if there's a vote and the committee does not support Mr. Mazier's motion, as I understand it, Ms. Collins intends to come back with a motion asking for more information of the sort that Mr. Mazier and his party would like to see. So I think that's sort of the choice we're facing. Either we have a 4-hour session, in which case we can order dinner, or we don't send this to the House and we come back and Ms. Collins gives a notice for her motion and we discuss her motion at the next meeting. So these are the choices. But right now, all I can do is continue down the list until somebody asks for a vote until somebody votes to adjourn debate. Is that, what would somebody have to do do we just have to go through the list till the end of the speakers, or can somebody say they want to adjourn debate on this? Either. So somebody could ask to adjourn debate on this, and then we'd have to have a vote. Or we can continue speaking. So right now I've got Ms. Taylor-Roy. Okay, Ms. Taylor-Roy, and I have Madame Chatel. Ms. Taylor-Roy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just wondering, in light of the fact that we received the information that was requested yesterday at 10:41, we received 21 pages of information, and it appeared to me that everything that had been requested by Mr. Mazier was in there. Why we're proceeding with this conversation and this motion at this point?
Because Mr. Mazier does not believe that his original motion was respected by the government, that he does not believe that the government satisfied his request. And so he considers this a matter relating to privilege, and he wants the committee to agree that this is the case and send the matter to the House. And so
this is all the debate we've heard from Mr. Detel and others. This is not about getting the information, since we now have the information. This is just that. Well,
it's
felt that he was not respected.
Basically, it's an attempt to censure the government for not providing the full information requested
quickly enough.
Well, that too, yeah, but it goes beyond quickly enough. It goes beyond the substance of what was provided. It goes to the substance of what was provided, which is deemed insufficient.
Okay, so could I hear then the 21 pages we received yesterday morning at 10:41 there were 3 or 4 attachments from the ministry. What is it that is missing currently? What is it that Mr. Maziere still wants to see that he is not included in those documents?
He contends that it does not show how the government arrived at its conclusion that the price on carbon will reduce emissions by 1/3 by, 2030, I think it was. Mr. Maziere is not satisfied with the information.
Okay, perhaps he could submit to the committee what in particular is missing in those.
Well, he did that.
Pages.
He did that before. So he did that before. So we'll go now to Mr. Cram, then to Madame Chatel. Take you off, okay, Mr. Cram.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just hope that we are all in agreement at what a routine request it is for parliamentary committees to request documents from the civil service. This is quite fundamental to our democracy, so we can see how the operations of government are moving forward and how parliamentarians can make better decisions based on that data and information and documents. And so I think it is completely reasonable and completely relevant for this committee to have requested the models that the government has been using for the past several years, on which it makes the decisions regarding these continual increases in the carbon tax and the effect that they claim that it is expected to have on emissions reductions. Like that has been central to the debate that we've been having in this country for several years now. And I think we can all agree, after reading what we got back from the government, that this response is completely unsatisfactory and completely inadequate. It reminds me of the scene from The Wizard of Oz when they finally arrive at the Emerald City, and all of a sudden they pull back this curtain, and all of a sudden the wizard says, "Pay no attention to that man behind the mirror. There is nothing to be seen here. Just go about your business." And that is what I thought of when I got this response from Environment and Climate Change Canada. It has the big draft watermark across the front, and it says, on page 1, it says, "Please note that this is a draft in progress. Any comments will be appreciated, and views expressed in this paper are those of the authors and do not reflect those of Environment and Climate Change Canada or the Government of Canada." And so one can't help but wonder, if this does not reflect the views of the Government of Canada, then what have they been basing these decisions off for the past several years? That was what Mr. Maziere requested before the Easter break. We have not received the full model yet, or at least I hope we haven't. If this is all that they've been going on for the last several years, that is wholly inadequate. So therefore, it is perfectly reasonable for Mr. Maziere to continue to request these documents, and it is fundamental to our democracy that we receive what these decisions have been made on. Anything less than that is totally unacceptable, Mr. Chair.
Great point.
Anyone else? Are we done with the speaking order? So I guess we can go to a vote on Mr. Maziere's motion. Okay, so we'll go to a vote.
Mr. Ali?
Do you support Mr.
Against?
Maziere?
Madame Chatel? Mr. Longfield? No. Ms. Taylor-Roy?
No.
Mr. Van Koeverden?
No.
Monsieur Dautel?
Is Ms. Hepner here for something?
Leah Taylor-Roy.
Pardon?
Leah Taylor-Roy voted. Lisa's there, she doesn't get a vote.
Okay, okay.
Mr. Cram?
In favor.
Mr. Leslie?
Yes.
Mr. Mazier?
Yes.
Madame Posey?
No.
Ms. Collins?
Okay, so the motion is defeated. Yeah.
If we recess for a quick 2 minutes?
No, let's do that, yeah.
Thanks.